Last time on the Story of Fortnite. From the distant future of space exploration to the high-octane world of superheroes, we took a look at Season 3 and Season 4 on the game. These two seasons saw Fortnite change in a way no one could have expected. An in-depth storyline that is still unfolding to this day. Insane rocket launches and apocalyptic meteor strikes changed the map and the way that we think about Fortnite Battle Royale forever. And at that time, we had no way of knowing that Epic Games were just getting started. In Season 4, the Visitor had ripped apart time and space itself during an in-game event that will always be remembered among Fortnite players. What we might not have expected were the consequences the actions of that character would have across the next season. The time rift above the map was a key part of Season 5's theme, Worlds Collide. Characters and points of interest from throughout history were pulled through rifts and into the world of Fortnite. Newly added areas including the Viking Outpost, a chilly Viking town on the top of a mountain, lazy links, a large golf field, and country club replaced what used to be Anarchy Acres. The biggest change of all, however, occurred where Moisty Mire used to be. The time rift seemed to have obliterated that location altogether, instead replacing it with a large desert biome, which included the oasis city Paradise Palms and a fully functional racetrack. Even later, Tomato Town was sucked out of time and space and instead replaced by an ancient tomato temple. The rifts that were spawned by the rocket event didn't stop at causing chaos from points of interest. They altered smaller parts of the map as well. In the lead up to Season 5, the Durburger sign had been consumed by the rift and was then deposited near Pleasant Park, which is basically half the map away. 6 Easter Island head statues also made their way onto the map, all of which usually had some chests around them. These small additions were joined by various Viking items and even an old Western carriage. And though they didn't really affect gameplay at all, it definitely helped create the atmosphere that something strange was happening to time and space on the island. Season 5 also brought with it the first true vehicle. The shopping cart had been in the game for a while, but that wasn't exactly a real vehicle considering you had to actually push it around. The all-terrain cart, or ATK for short, appeared all over the map. 4 players were able to ride in it, and 3 who weren't driving were able to shoot at enemies or emote as they drove along. The coolest thing about the ATKs were their ability to perform a boost. You could pull the ATK into a drift, which would cause the tires to spark different colors from blue to red, depending on how long you held the drift. This was a reference to Super Mario Kart and allowed players to travel around the map quicker than ever before. The 5th Fortnite season also continued the story of the mode, and on August 24th, the rift in the sky shot down a massive bolt of lightning, which spawned a giant cube, which the community later called Kevin. If you were near Kevin the Cube, you could slowly gain shield, and if you jumped into him, you would bounce away. The one thing that Kevin didn't like was if you shot him. He would quickly retaliate with a damaging zap of purple lightning. Shortly after entering the Fortnite world, Kevin the Cube began to move around the island, stopping at regular intervals to create a large gravity field that gave players a bouncy effect similar to Hop Rocks. And while stopped, the cube would also begin to burn a rune into the ground, which it did a total of 7 times. After creating its 7 runes, the cube made a turn directly toward Loot Lake, where it entered the water and dissolved, turning the entire surface of the lake purple, with the same runes that flickered on the surface of the cube now flickering on the lake itself. Players could bounce around on top of the lake, but if you shot it, you wouldn't get struck by lightning bolts. In Season 6, everything had been leading up to this. All of the story elements had converged to create the cube, a cube that throughout Season 5 caused havoc across the Fortnite map by spawning giant anti-gravity stones and by turning Loot Lake into a giant purple bouncy surface. By this time, the community was ready for something new, and the cube did not disappoint. In a cutscene, we were shown the surface of the now purple Loot Lake stream toward the island at its center, before once more becoming the cube. Only now, the cube was floating above the world of Fortnite, and it was carrying the Loot Lake Island with it. Alongside the rise of Loot Lake Island was the spooky haunted castle that appeared near Haunted Hills. Wailing Woods was also partially changed, the hedge maze had been removed, and instead there was an entrance to a secret underground laboratory. You could also access this laboratory through basements of 4 new cabins that had been constructed in Wailing Woods. The labs looked like they were still under construction, but despite that, research had clearly already begun. For the most part, the rifts around the map had disappeared except for in Wailing Woods. In that laboratory, the scientists had clearly been able to generate their very own rift rift, and it remained the only one in the game. The Rise of Darkness was the theme of Season 6, and that didn't just mean the rise of the island at Loot Lake. The cube was an evil object, one that was born out of something violating the laws of space and time itself. One of the symptoms of that evil was the runes that had been placed all over the map. These runes, much like the cube itself, were having an effect on the Fortnite map. They had begun to corrupt the ground that they were on. Grass was not able to grow in these locations, and strange glowing rocks could be found on the ground. These rocks were known as shadow stones, and consuming them would literally turn you into a ghost. You would turn invisible, and you could jump incredibly high. You'd also phase your way through structures and buildings, which was equal parts cool and useful. On the one hand, the season was full of danger and darkness, and on the other, there had been a new and cute addition to the Battle Pass. Back bling had been evolving steadily over the course of Fortnite's life, from simple and almost boring designs in the earlier seasons to more impressive models from Season 3 onward. By leveling up your Battle Pass, you could unlock 3 different pets: Bonzi the dog at tier 12, Camo the chameleon at tier 29, and finally, Scales the dragon at tier 43. All of these pets had different animations depending on what you were doing in the game, and Camo even changed color depending on what rarity of item you picked up. They may not have exactly fit the scary theme of Season 6, but they added more personality and charm to the backbling system. But back to the first hand, because the darkness and danger on the Fortnite island was still building, Kevin the Cube had lifted the Loot Lake island up into the air. But it wasn't content with just that. The cube began to float around the Fortnite map, bringing the island on its back along for the ride. The cube was retracing its steps, following the path that it had laid out on its journey to Loot Lake. And as it reached each rune it had previously left on the ground, lightning arced between it and the rune, ripping it up from the ground so it could absorb the energy that was contained within it. After gathering the power from all 7 of the runes, the cube returned to Loot Lake once more, where it hovered above the vortex that was still present from when it first emerged from the lake. And as this was happening, a portal began to form over the island, which slowly grew over time. Eventually, when the cube had gathered enough energy, it ripped the island itself apart into 3 separate fragments. The explosion of the island was the final event to occur before Fortnitemares begun, in what seems to now be a yearly tradition for Fortnite. Fortnitemares was a celebration of everything spooky. A strange fog descended into the Fortnite map, and with it came hordes of cube monsters spawned from cube fragments. The introduction of these creatures was the first time Fortnite Battle Royale players had to fight against AI characters in Battle Royale, but fighting them was a risk and a reward play, because defeating the fiends and brutes from the cube fragments would grant you various levels of shields and loot. The battle bus was also updated over the spooky period. It had tattered black rags billowing off the balloon, and the roof of the bus was covered in candles and spooky pumpkins. The Fortnitemares events even reintroduced players to the fan-favorite Skull Trooper skin, something fans had been requesting for months. While the Fortnitemares event was in progress, strange things were happening to the cube. Over the course of a week, Kevin the Cube began to show signs of damage, and what was once a perfectly flat and smooth surface was beginning to show cracks. These cracks slowly covered the entire cube until eventually a slimy inner surface was revealed. Occasionally, the surface leaked a strange goo into the vortex below. The major cube event finally occurred on November 4th. The cube began to spin and rotate in the air, lightning shooting off it at every angle until it suddenly exploded into a giant flash of white light. This explosion sent every player on the Fortnite map at the time into a strange pocket dimension where, for the first time in Fortnite Battle Royale history, a cutscene was played. In this cutscene, a giant rift butterfly appeared before the player, and it then shrunk down and approached them before sending the players back to the Fortnite map to finish off the rest of the map. But the players returning to the map at this time knew that this was nothing like what they had left before. The big hole in Loot Lake had been covered up by the ground, and the pieces of Kevin the Cube that had exploded were left embedded in the center, arranged in a similar way to Stonehenge. What does this mean for the story going onward? No one is really sure. Over the remaining few weeks of Season 6, we were treated to a fast food battle between Uncle Pete's Pizza Pit and Der Burger. A strange parachute appeared at the top of the tallest chimney in Flush Factory. The scientists at Wailing Woods managed to complete the portal project, and most importantly, out in the distance, a blizzard-covered iceberg had been sighted, drawing ever closer to Fortnite Island.